I think a lot of entrepreneurs make the mistake of, trying to assign a price to what they do as opposed to looking at the extrapolated value that they bring. Right, so the cost of a campaign when you're creating some marketing strategy or whatever the case is pales in comparison to the net return, right? Like the business that we're working on right now, you could look on a real base level and go, well, geez, $100 per employee seems like a dramatic expense, right? I mean, you got 10,000 employees, right? $100 a piece, it's $1 million of expense. Well, in the bigger scheme of things, that represents a fraction of 1% of what their current expenditure is. So if I can stop a 5 or 7% increase, right, at a cost of 1%, what's the value? Am I overcharging? Am I undercharging? So you start to think about it that way, and I think that a lot of times what happens is we assign our own kind of belief system. We assign our own sensibility to what is expensive or what's not expensive. And when you're on the journey up, you start to your perspective is a little bit crazy, right? Some things, one thing to one person might seem like it's extraordinarily expensive. To somebody else, it's really marginal. But when you actually look at it in terms of value, right, and in terms of ROI, what's the return on this? If you look at what you're doing not as an expense but as an investment, then what's the return on that investment? What does it translate to, for the business when they make this decision, or for the individual? And I think that the same happens, like businesses all the time make this fatal mistake where they start to look at expenses, they look at items on their P&L as an expense as opposed to as an investment. Right? And when you start looking at only bottom line expenses, you start to annihilate some really valuable elements of a culture, right? So, to apply it to like a sales organization, when you start canceling incentives and trips and rewards and acknowledgement, and maybe it's trophies, maybe it's a gift card, a coffee gift card that shows somebody you care. But when you stop doing that, you destroy the culture. So what's the long-term effect? Like if I don't make this investment, which a bean counter is going to look at as an expense, like what are the implications to the progress of my business? Does it measurably go backwards? Am I able to get the same kind of lift that I once got? Am I starting to erode culture? There's an old Jack Welch kind of statement that's culture eats strategy for lunch. If your strategy is to cut costs and look at expenses and not consider the implications, like you're on a road to despair. And I think it goes on both sides of this, right? So if you're fighting against that company that has that bean counter, you've got to really push for what are the implications. Like play that movie all the way to the end, as we always say. But when you're starting out as a business, understanding the value you bring changes the conversation, right? It stops about being transactional and it starts to turn around and become an investment. And that also creates a perpetual relationship, right? When you bring value, right, then, it's not just this one time, okay, well, here you can have this cup and it's 50 cents. But if I can use this cup to build a sandcastle, like what's the value of that if that's ultimately my objective? I don't know why I use that illustration, but you get this. This is not just a piece of plastic, right? It can hold all sorts of things. What if you were able to hold gold in this, right? And your hands were incapable of holding that amount. What's the value of that? So, don't misconstrue investments for expenses, and don't limit yourself by price. Always think about the value you can bring. And that's the best way to price yourself, when you start to, consider things. When you have confidence that your value exceeds the cost, that's when people start to, look at you every single time and go, yeah, of course I would do that. That's inexpensive. That's cheap, right? I feel like I'm stealing from you. I feel guilty about it.